Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover The Authentic Confucius by Annping Chin. This is book 4 of my 2025 reading list. Well, last week I covered the Analects of Confucius, and these are the sayings that are compiled by his disciples after his death, and most of them consist of 3 different parts. You've got the first part, which is just the saying itself, so kind of the wisdom literature aspect of the saying. The second part is the person. So with most of these, you read of the master, and that would be Confucius, but there's another person involved. And so that person, it may be a disciple, it may be somebody that Confucius just comes upon in his life. And that person may ask him a question, or Confucius may be commenting on this person. And so there's this aspect of a person. And if you just read the Analects, you start seeing these names, and there's a lot of them. So it's kind of hard just to keep track of who's who and different characteristics of each person. But that's the second part is there is a very personal aspect of each of these sayings. And then there's a third component, and that is a time location aspect of each of these sayings. So there's a political reality going on, and there's a time in Confucius's life where this saying is being said. And so if you're just reading the Analects, you get number 1, you get the wisdom literature, and you could just read through the Analects and get the wisdom literature saying of it. Number 2, the person, you get a little bit, but unless you have a commentary next to you, or you're taking notes and kind of making notes about each of the people who are mentioned and kind of compiling all those, it's hard to get the person aspect of who Confucius is talking to. And you don't get at all, hardly, the third component of the time and location. And so what this book does, The Authentic Confucius, is that it basically gives you number 3, and it gives you a time and a location for many of the sayings of Confucius. So what it does is it combines the Analects with the Zuo commentary, which was written between 722 and 468. And so in that commentary, you've got kind of the historical record of what's going on during this time, and then Annping Chin is taking the 2 of those and giving a timeline. So even the structure of this book it outlines the life of Confucius. So you start at the beginning and you go through his life, and then you even see after his life of what some of his followers did after him in keeping his legacy alive. But through that, she is telling you which statements were made at which time. And I also read Annping Chin's translation of the Analects, and what she does, what's great about that translation is that you have the saying, and then immediately after that you have the notes about the saying. And so she's giving you a lot of the context about the number 2 aspect of the person, and she'll even give you information that's outside of the Analects about some of these people. So that I found that to be very helpful. But yeah, that third part, you really needed a book like this to give you more of the time frame and location of where a lot of these statements were made. And I found that to be so interesting, and I'm so glad I read this book. Just she would sometimes just list a whole set of statements that he made, but in a given area, and then you've just kind of read the history of what has just happened, why Confucius is in this particular area at this particular time, and then to see the statements he's making and to even see some of the questions posed to him in context is really helpful. And so I want to just give one example here, and this is a whole paragraph in this book. So this is the statement of Confucius is at the very end, but the first part here is some historical context given by Annping Chin. So here we go. The district of Shi had originally been a part of Kai. In 493 BC, the ruler of Kai decided to move his capital east to be nearer to Wu, which was his ally at the time. The area around Shi was therefore left to its own devices. 2 years later, the government of Chu took control of Xi, and its representatives encouraged the people of Kai, who had decided not to move east with the ruler, to come and settle in Xi and to recognize Chu as their new overlord. When Confucius arrived in Xi, the governor had just been assigned there. His subjects were essentially a foreign people, and he was a long way from his own political base in Chu. In their first conversation, the administrator asked Confucius, "What is considered good government?" Confucius replied, "A government is good when those who are near are pleased and those who are far away are drawn to it." The advice was appropriate to the governor's circumstances at the time. End quote. So I know there were a lot of names in there, a lot of places and all that, but what you've got going here is Annping Chin is telling you what's going on. When Confucius arrives in Xi, the governor had just been assigned there. So you get the context that he's been assigned here. His subjects are foreign people, and he's a long way from his political base. And then this is the question that he asked Confucius: what is considered good government? So if you're just reading the Analects, you just come upon that Analect, and it says so-and-so asked the master, "What is considered good government?" And then the master replied, "A government is good," and then says the rest of the statement. So you don't get any of that context. You don't know, and you don't know why this person is asking that question. And so you can, there's a certain level of insight you can get just reading the Analect, but I mean, just seeing all of this context to that statement, it just adds so much more. So you get a date here, you get a location, you get a person, and you get the full context for the statement. It just example after example of this in this book. Want to highlight a few things that surprised me as I was learning about Confucius. So just a quick, to take a step back here, I started reading the Analects on March 1st of this year, so March 1st, 2025. And I just expected to read through them once. I thought it might take 2 or 3 days because you just look at the Analects themselves and they're rather short. You could probably just get through them in a couple long reading sessions. And so here I'm thinking, I'll be done with these early March, and then I'm going to get back into what I'm really excited about, which is the Greek tragedies. And but I fell in love with this period, and I got really interested in Confucius. I was kind of blown away. Most of what I thought I knew about Confucius or I had heard in the past was incorrect. And so I want to highlight a few of those things here in just a minute. But I've also I've traveled to China a few times, mostly to Hong Kong, but one trip to the mainland many years ago, and I've just since then just had a real love of the history of China and wanting to know more. And before that initial trip, I read all this stuff about China. I was super, super excited to go. And just the history has always fascinated me. And so, I just caught that bug again when I started reading the Analects and kind of seeing how tied this was to Chinese history, how tied Confucius was to politics and government and looking back even to a previous time in Chinese history. So I caught the bug, so I got a second translation of it. Then I read this Authentic Confucius, and then I'm now reading the Book of Songs, which is something that Confucius references quite often in the Analects. So I'll spend the entire month of March here reading about Confucius or things related to Confucius, and then I'll get back into the Greek tragedies at the beginning of April here. So a little longer than I expected, but it has been a joyful study here this past month. So here are a few things that I didn't know going in that surprised me that I've learned about Confucius here. So the first is just kind of in general, I was surprised to learn how much we know about this period. Confucius lived from 551 to 479 BC, and he's looking back to a period and speaking about a period in the 11th century BC. So around the 1050s is when a leader that he really looked up to was living. And then it goes all the way to these sayings of his. He didn't write anything down, but his sayings were compiled by his disciples in the decades and centuries after his life. So you've got this rather long time span in there. In reading this book, The Authentic Confucius, I was blown away at how much we know about the political situation, who the leaders were, exact conversations between people. It's really astonishing, and just for her to tie it all together with the Analects was really neat. The second thing here is that I had always thought that Confucius was a religious leader, and that is not the case at all. Now, after his life, Confucianism may have taken on more of that religious aspect, but during his life, there were no temples built for Confucius. Like that was all after his death. And I think the best way to think about this is that Confucius didn't consider himself a prophet, in the sense that he was not born with all of this knowledge and then he was just imparting this knowledge on other people. Instead, he thought he was gathering the wisdom around him and then sharing it with others. So he makes the statement that he did not originate anything. He was simply a transmitter. And so in my mind, I would have assumed Confucius had come up with all of these sayings, that it was a deeply religious aspect of it, but it's not really at all. There's a deep wisdom aspect of it. There's a philosophical aspect. There's a political aspect, but and then he's trying to connect the moral life with political life, and kind of the big goal for somebody is to live the kind of life that you could then become someone who works in the government. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but I found that to be very interesting. When he was asked a question, he would think about the question. It wasn't just this immediate response based upon a worldview that he had that he was trying to get across. It was he would get that question and then just look at both sides of it, kind of bounce it around, and then answer. And that was just complete opposite of what I expected going in. The third thing and final thing that really surprised me here was just the political aspect of his work. I wouldn't have expected that, again, kind of tied to that religious aspect. So real quick, the author of this work, Annping Chin, she taught at Yale and amongst other places. She retired in 2018. And then this book that she wrote, The Authentic Confucius, she wrote in 2007. So 18 years ago. And then she translated the Analects, and that came out in 2014. And that, if you get the Penguin Classics edition of the Analects, that's the one that she translated. So I want to read a paragraph here in the prelude for this book, or prologue. And this is the reason she wrote this book. So this is a little intro into why she wrote it. So let me start here. So until the mid-20th century, China was so inseparable from the idea of Confucius that her scheme of government and in society, her concept of the self and human relationships, and her construct of culture and history all seem to have originated from his mind alone. To outsiders like us, Confucius is evocative not only of China, but also of concepts such as family, education, teacher, scholar, scholarship, refinement, humility, civility, order, obedience, the father, women, oppressed, repression of impulses, conformity, timidity, weakness. We give him credit for all that has gone right and wrong in China because we do not really know him. That is the reason why I wrote this book. I wanted to know Confucius, and I wanted the book to be a discovery. Since the beginning of my teaching career, I had been drawn to his thinking, to his love of learning, and to his attempt to keep the idea of the moral within human reach. Yet at the same time, I wanted him to be within my reach. I wanted him to take me to his teachings. And so for 2 decades, I wandered through early books and their commentaries, scouting for leads that might yield a little bit more of Confucius. As I was writing this book, the drive became a tighter search for an authentic Confucius. So I'll end the reading of that there, but that is the reason that Annping Chin read this book. Just a side note, I have, so as part of this reading project and going through the great books, the immortal books here, I am trying to pair a guidebook with most of the books just to help me understand them. I'm doing this project by myself. I'm not, in a university doing this. And so I need a lot of help in understanding and as this book showed, just understanding more of the historical context of where these sayings took place, the time they took place, and that kind of thing. And so I'm always looking for guidebooks. And I have found great guidebooks so far for this project simply by looking at what the translators I like, what they have written. And so I can think of 3 examples off the top of my head of where that's been the case so far. But if you're looking for something that just helps you understand a book you're reading more, one good place to start is to look at the translation you're reading, see who translated the work, and then see if they've written another book maybe about that work, and might lead you to a good book like this one. Quick reading stats. This book took me 6.5 hours to get through, and enjoyed it very much. So in the next segment, I'm going to cover 3 things that I learned about Confucius in this book, and then in the final segment 3, I'll cover the one thing, my key takeaway from the Authentic Confucius. Let me start segment 2 here by reading the very first paragraph of the prologue. This is kind of a neat intro to Confucius. Confucius concentrated on living a life as well as he knew how. He wished only to be granted a few more years so that, he said, when I reach the age of 50, I may try to understand the principles of change, and I shall be able to steer clear of making serious mistakes. It was learning, therefore, and a desire to perfect himself, together with an awareness that this life was the only occasion he had to fulfill his wish and promise, that distinguished him. Perhaps there were other men, contemporaries, who wanted the same things, but none desired them as strongly as Confucius, and none was as determined as he to scour all the knowledge passed down to him, history, poetry, ritual practice, and music, so that he might understand what was essential and enduring about human nature and the human lot, and steer clear of making serious mistakes. I'll stop reading there, and in this segment, I want to cover 3 things that I learned about Confucius in this book. The first is this, that he was a common gentleman, and this had a huge impact and direction in where his life led, and the teachings that he did. And so he was born in 551 BC to common parents. He was 3 when his father died, and he was still young when his mother died. He married a woman, and they had a son and a daughter. But the key point there is that he was born to common parents. He was not born of the aristocracy. He was not born of privilege in the sense that his father would have passed on a job to him. And so here is a statement by Annping Chin. He was the son of a common gentleman, a she, which meant that his position in society depended entirely on what he did with his life, how he spent his time and applied his skills and knowledge. He inherited no privileges or entitlements except for a chance to have an education and a status that was above a commoner. Even so, Confucius was lucky because he came into the world at the right time. So, I ended the quote there. The key thing here is his son, a gentleman. He no privileges or entitlements. So anything he had in his life had to be based on his application of skills and knowledge. So this was a meritocracy in that sense. And this is a time in China when there was a shifting relationship between the nobility and the commoners. And so there was a decline in the aristocratic class at this time. And this is really the key to understanding Confucius, because he put forward that you could rise in your life through a moral path, through love of learning. You could rise and become a learned gentleman, and then get a role in the government. And before that, you had to be in the aristocracy to get these kind of roles. You had to be you had to be part of the nobility. And so things were shifting in that people who were learning and people who were applying their skills and knowledge, they were able to start getting some of these positions. And so he was there at the right time to kind of usher this in and to help men on their way, on their path, and tying this moral path to that getting positions in the government. So that was neat. But just if he had been born in the aristocracy, he just would have had no reason to even think about these things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that he had a shift happen in his life, and so he's got a minor position. He's the minister of crime in an area called Lu, and in 497 he leaves that job and he leaves everything. He leaves his disciples, his students, and he goes to wander for 14 years in self-exile. And it's what Annping Chin does in this book is show you how he shifts really from a emphasis on politics to more of an emphasis on teaching after those 14 years when he comes back to Lu. And so here's something Annping Chin says. She says, they give the impression that he had taken a sharp turn in his life, redirecting his attention from politics to teaching, from counseling the prince to nurturing the young, end quote. And so this was really hard to see just in reading the Analects. But when it's presented in more of a chronological order, you can see how his teachings change. Again, the Analects are not, there's no order, there's certainly no chronological order to the sayings of Confucius. And so if you just read them, it's hard to see changes or shifts in thinking. But here's one that Annping Chin identifies and just say, the earlier emphasis was really big on politics, but it went more towards teaching as he got further on in life. The third thing I learned that surprised me is that Confucius put a man to death. And this was when he was the minister of crime in Lu, and he sentenced what he called a goodly man to death. And a later historian said that this man, the goodly man, was one who created political disorder and was one who would resemble the good but would do the opposite. And so here's a statement that Confucius made about this man. He was in tune with prevalent custom and blends in with the sordid world. When in a state of repose, he appears to be conscientious and trustworthy. When actively engaged with the world, he appears to be principled and immaculate. People all like him, and he thinks he is in the right. And one thing Annping Chin says about him is that, well, he was Confucius's moral opponent, but not his professional rival. And the really interesting thing is that this man did not break any law, but Confucius had him executed in his role as minister of crime in Lu. And here's another statement of why. This man personified what Confucius despised most, since he closely resembled something good, but if one could see the heart or the kernel of him, one would find the very opposite, end quote. And so I found that to be very interesting that, because Confucius would come across other people in his life, robbers and different people, and he didn't have any of them executed, but this one man just really got to him. And there's been debate across history as to was this man worse than we're told, or was he better? Was this something that Confucius was jealous and this guy was taking his disciples or something like that? But a lot to read and consider about this. But I found it interesting that in that role he put a man to death. So now in the last segment here, I will cover the one thing, my one key takeaway from the Authentic Confucius. All right, segment 3, one of my favorite things I do in each episode. Here's a statement that Annping Chin makes about Confucius. Everything Confucius tells us about himself is also about his teaching. There are steps, but no regimen, because his teaching complements his life. It mirrors the life unfolding, and it is natural. End quote. So there, you get this idea that there's just this natural, organic philosophy that's happening. It's I call it thought on the spot. He's asked a question. Confucius is asked a question, and then he thinks about it. There's not this immediate reference to a worldview where he gives the same answer to people every time. Now there were statements that he would refer to often. There's his silver rule. There was living along the path. There were certain things that you saw come up over and over, but there wasn't this overarching worldview. But it was more, as she describes it here, in organic, like a natural unfolding of his life, and that the statements that he was making, it they were mirroring his life as it was unfolding. And you really see that in this book when you see his life and then you see some of these statements in more of a chronological order. So that's my one thing from this book. Just again, I think it mostly just because this was the exact opposite of what I thought going in. I thought Confucius was more of a religious leader and not someone who would be thinking about questions from people of all walks of life and just thinking about the question for a long time before answering. But I got to know Confucius a little bit in the reading of the Analects and then this book, and so it's been fun. Another quote from Annping Chin ties into this very well, and this is about the tension of human nature. So she says this: "For he also tells us in so many different ways that even though our hearts want to do good and has the capacity to do what it wants to do, it does not fulfill its promise. The rush forward is thrown back by a strange resistance. In itself, this too is human nature. In fact, this very tension best describes the condition of the heart, and it gives humans a point to their quest and a reason to learn. A skillful teacher plans his lessons accordingly. He brings his understanding of human nature to his instruction. An extraordinary teacher, like Confucius, goes further. He relates human nature to the source, the current to the spring, so that even the resistance in the rush is nature's way, and he believes that when a lesson is learned and rightfully applied, it should not feel onerous or unnatural." End quote. One other thing Confucius said is that he taught by imparting light into a dark corner or throwing light. So I just love this picture of Confucius throwing light, and that being his method of teaching. And that contrasted against another word that could be used for teaching, but has more of a lecture connotation. So you don't get the sense that Confucius was lecturing, but he was instead teaching by imparting light or throwing light. So I love that visual. Last thing I want to highlight here is what happened to Confucius during the Cultural Revolution of the last century. And he fell out of favor. He's been in favor for a lot of Chinese history, and he fell out of favor during the Communist Revolution, the Cultural Revolution in China. And during that, they dug up his grave to declare that he was safely dead. So congratulations to them. I bet that was a great thing, digging someone up 2,500 years later, nearly. And, they left his temple, or his main temple, but they did dig up his grave, which is pretty wild. So in conclusion, this is a very helpful guide for going deeper into the Analects. It provides the helpful historical background that I did not get in the Analects. So some of the Analects, they have great notes and that kind of thing, but the timeline aspect is very hard to get just from the nature of the Analects and them not being in chronological order or that kind of thing. I recommend pairing this Authentic Confucius with Annping Chin's translation. So obviously read the Analects first. Here's what I would suggest. Get Annping Chin's translation and just read the Analects. Just go through, just skip the notes that are at right after each of the Analects. And then go back and then read the Analects again with the notes, because then you get to know the people that Confucius is talking to. While you're doing that, have either write in the back of the book or just have a notebook open next to you and write down those people's names, and then just kind of write notes every time that you come across them. That will just kind of help you as you're reading. And then after you've done all that, then read this Authentic Confucius to get more of the timeline and chronological aspect of the Analects. So that way you get the saying, the person, and the location. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear from you, especially if you have read Confucius, if I missed something, if I misrepresented something, if you have a suggestion for another book to read or something to dig deeper into this. I would love to hear of those things. I am leading a reading group this year, both in person and online. So the in-person one is if you live in the Nashville area, we meet at Landmark Booksellers on the second Monday of each month. Most of the time it's the second second Monday. And then the Wednesday after that second Monday of the month, we meet online. So if you become a paid subscriber on the Books of Titans Substack, you will get the emails that have the Zoom link to do those meetings. So the next one is the second Monday of April, and we're going to cover the Great Gatsby. And so I'd love for you to join on that. I've got a plan for as little as $5 a month. So for about the cup of coffee, you can join this reading group, and it's very fun. We've covered some great books this year, and it'll just be a different short great book each month of this year. So I'd love to have you join. You can kind of jump in to whichever of the books that you are interested in reading. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter at Books of Titans, and go to the website as well. I've got Substack, but then also just reading lists and reading tips and all sorts of fun stuff there. I have my Immortal Books reading list, which is what I'm going through right now. Confucius is number 10 on the list of 200 different authors that I plan to read through over the next 15 years. So I'll be back next week to either discuss a Greek tragedy, or I'm reading this book of songs now. I don't know how far I'm going to get through that, but if I get through that, I might cover that one as well. And that's, again, book of songs from China. That will do it for this week. Until next week, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.